Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match gameplay. This time around we are on the Bleak Dale playing as the Wood Elves against the Vampire Counts. So for my composition here, doing nothing too fancy, basically a standard sort of Wood Elf build, but wanted to try out vanilla War Dancers against the forces of the forces of the Vampire Counts here, because I've been having some decent success with War Dancers, using them against relatively well-armored foes, just because they have such monstrous melee stats. They've got a baseline of, I do believe it's 44 melee attack here. They're being boosted up by the branch wraith, but nonetheless, if you look at one of the fringe units here that didn't get chevrons, you can see 44 melee attack, 34 melee defense, so very, very survivable even. They do have some physical resist. They've got a bonus against infantry of 8, so their weapon strength isn't too bad. If you look at it, honestly, they've got they're pretty solid stats overall, and they've got a pretty monstrous charge bonus there, and of course the Shadow Coil. So I figured that no matter what my opponent brought here, as the Vampire Counts, if I was able to, say, debuff his Graveguard a whole bunch with Durthu, with Sword of Daith, stacked on top of the Branch Wraith, with the Withering, I'd be able to bring them down low enough for the War Dancers to hack and slash their way through them pretty quick. Alongside that, though, I did, of course, bring this front line of War Dancers and Durthu. Durthu, of course, is an absolute beast. He's actually pretty good against the Vampire Counts who don't have too many counters to him. Even their anti-large units will struggle to break through 100 armor and 20% physical resist. And of course, he does have Frenzy, so he's pretty powerful that way. He's got Wild Heart, so I did bring Wild Heart and Blessing of the Ancients because this map does have some woods, and I wasn't sure where we'd be fighting, and these are both fairly cheap sort of support abilities. Wiston's Wild Form, because I figured plus 30 armor, especially if you're fighting Graveguard, which is very standard. Honestly, most of the Vampire Counts units that you'll see don't have AP, or much AP, when you're playing as Wood Elves, so extra 30 armor and 25% weapon damage on units that don't do... on units that aren't AP based anyway is pretty good. I also do, of course, have Foe Seeker just to keep my Vigor up, and Lamentation of Despair, as well as, of course, the Sword of Daith. So some decent spells there. In the back, we do have a Spellslinger of Shadows mounted on a horse. She is coming in with the Penumbral Pendulum, as well as Enfeebling Foe, and, of course, the Power Stone to give me some more Winds of Magic. So I figured Enfeebling Foe might be good if I need to really KO a unit, cripple it, or do something like that. It can be very useful. And she also does have the Power of the Ancients. Honestly, I should have taken it off Durthu, and I didn't really think about it, but I should have kept the Blessing of the Ancients on her, because she can hide in the woods much more easily than Durthu can. For the rest of my army, 3 units of Glade Guard and Starfire Shafts provide me with a good amount of sort of armor piercing and fire damage, which is great against Vampire Counts, who of course have a lot of fire vulnerable units with regen. 2 units of War Dancers with Azar Spears to provide some anti-large, and these guys are decent, not amazing, but decent against a lot of squishy units, just because they do have that 30 melee attack, which is okay, and of course with their monstrous melee defense, basically nothing's getting through. They've actually got one of the higher melee defenses, I do believe, of halberd infantry in the game, or of polearm infantry in the game. Definitely better than a lot of the other elite troops. I actually think they might. I think they might actually have better melee defense than, say, Blackguard. Obviously, Phoenix Guard not with Martial Prowess active, but it's still very good. And then, of course, the Sisters of Thorn over here, who do apply poison, so kind of some range pressure, and they're a decent melee unit. And, of course, they do provide me with 2 free spells, a Shield of Thorns as well as Curse of Anraer. And with their 50% physical resistance, they're very hard for my opponent to sort of take down. Vampire Counts don't have too much access to magic damage, surprisingly, except ethereal units, but ethereal units are a rare sight against Wood Elves, just because of how much magic damage Wood Elves have. So outside of spells, Vampire Counts don't, and the Black Coach, the Vampire Counts don't have much else that can really dish out the hurt to the Sisters. For my opponent's build, he did bring a whole bunch of Graveguard here in the front, 4 units of them, a unit of Cryptars backing them up. Interesting choice on the Cryptars. I don't think they're really good against Wood Elves, because the Wood Elves can shred them pretty easily, but you never know. Alongside them, a unit of Vargeist, once again a little interesting, but with their monster's weapon strength, these guys can definitely lay the smack down on any Wood Elf units very, very quickly and tear them to shreds. They of course do have Frenzy as well, so they've got some pretty crazy buffs to their already solid baseline stats. On the flank here, my opponent does have a little bit of a Goon Squad, a Vampire Lord coming in with Invocation of Nehek as well as Wind of Death, which I don't think is very good against Elves. Elves usually don't fight in the sort of static defensive lines, and even if they do a more classic build. Plus, people kind of expect it, but you never know, you might get a good cast off. If Invocation of the Heck, Pestilential Breath, of course, and Sword of Anti-Air, so definitely quite a bit of damage output potential. Though even against Durthu, with just 44 melee attack, he's going to struggle. He's going to be hitting less than 50% of the time. Similarly over here, the Terrorgeist chevroned up a whole bunch. Decent melee attack, though nothing spectacular. Really, most of its advantage here is coming from its bonus versus large. But I do believe, once again, a Terrorgeist, I think, loses to Durthu in a 1v1. Durthu is just an absolute beast in melee, so really there's very few units in the game that can take on him. Finally, on the periphery is really where my opponent's the main sort of troublemakers for my army are. A unit of Black Knights over here, not too much of a threat in and of themselves, but with these 4 units of Direwolves who are already sneaking around, I'm going to have a very hard time defending my backline. Perhaps, in retrospect, I should probably drop the unit of Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts, crammed an extra unit of Eternal Guard, but I didn't do that. I was feeling a little greedy, a little overconfident, and this is the end result. So regardless, my Starfire Shafts are unfortunately firing into the Grave Guard as they advance, but shortly they'll start teeing off on the Crypt Horrors, who with their region are incredibly susceptible to this sort of fire, and are melting incredibly quickly. In the meantime, my opponent is trying to get his Black Knights in on my Glade Guard. I almost called them Grave Guard. So I'm going to intercept with the Spellslinger and try to get some War Dancers into the fray. In the meantime, you can see the Sisters of the Thorn pulling back to engage on these Direwolves, try to buy my Glade Guard some time as these Azrai Spears do try to tie my opponent's troops down. Unfortunately, my opponent is just able to oversaturate my backlines, and you can see these Direwolves diving in, getting on top of my Glade Guard, and they're going to tear them to absolute shreds. Over here in the meantime, these War Dancers did have their charge broken and intercepted by the Vargeist, and although they are trading pretty well with the Vargeist, they're not going to be able to get to the Grave Guard, and that means this Branch Wraith is alone here against the Grave Guard. Unfortunately for my opponent's Sword of Death does go down and is absolutely annihilating these Branch Wraiths. You can see over here a little of a spell going down, blasting some Graveguard to the Shadow Realm there. And in the meantime, these War Dancers have kind of stacked up here and are crushing this Graveguard with contemptuous ease. You can see, of course, with those debuffs on their melee defense, they really don't stand much of a chance. On the flanks here, these Graveguard are kind of sitting around. The War Dancers are tying 2 units of them down. You can see they're actually tearing through the Graveguard here pretty effectively, despite the fact that they're not really getting that benefit from debuffs. Crypt Horrors dive in, but against Durthu, once again, Durthu is such a beast. He can really anchor a line. Over here, my opponent does finally crack these Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts, kind of overrunning them. You can see I do pull these Starfire Shafts clear and try to engage on these Vargeist. You can see over here my opponent is trying to get a nice little Wind of Death, but I do scatter clear. Most of my units do get out of the way. You can see a few guys over there getting smushed, but it doesn't really matter. And you can see the Glade Guard are sticking around, which is very important. I did manage to pull my Sisters of the Thorn back to help deal with these Dire Wolves. These War Dancers do rout, but not before crushing these Vargeists for most part. And you can see these Black Knights just kind of falling apart. They're crumbling. They're getting slaughtered by the War Dancers as our spears. Over here, the Spellslinger of Shadows is in the pits helping defend. And the Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts do have okay melee defense at 27, so they can hold their own for a little while. Unfortunately, I do let these Azrai Spears kind of fall away. They kind of walk over here, and it takes me a little while before I finally realize that they're over there and to pull them back into the fray. I do believe they were chasing against those Black Knights who had crumbled. So regardless, you can see the Spellslinger Shadows over here kind of slugging it out. Over here, my opponent does finally pull the Direwolves through, and he's trying to get on top of my Glade Guard, but you can see the Sisters of the Thorn doing their very best to defend them. And of course, the Glade Guard, once again, decent melee defense at 27, so they can hold okay. Not great, but they can hold okay against the Direwolves, and that's really important in this situation. In the meantime, you can see for the rest of my opponent's army, over here these Direwolves do get intercepted by the War Dancers, so they're going to get smushed pretty quickly. They obviously can't do very much to War Dancers, they've only lost 1 model in this whole time, and even these War Dancers who have been in the pits have only lost 1 model, so really showing how powerful they can be. Spellslinger, of course, providing some support over there. And here in the pits, you can see Durthu slugging it out, but this Vampire Lord is not having a good day at all. He hasn't been shot. He just dove down and decided to engage on Durthu, and Durthu decided to lay a smackdown on it, a royal smackdown on this guy. So you can see he's dropped about half health and does take off, deciding that discretion is the better part of valor. As the little Terrorgeist friend here is getting kind of slaughtered by the War Dancers, who are also chewing through the Crypt Horrors over there. So with that, my opponent's really going to be kind of depleted. Unfortunately, though, these Graveguard finally did rout off the War Dancers. You can see they're fleeing for dear life over there. Graveguard, I think, might be able to win an extended fight against War Dancers. I'm not entirely sure, but it doesn't really matter. The War Dancers' Azrai Spears are now charging in, and War Dancers' Azrai Spears are actually one of those units that does rather well. They're halberd infantry or polearm infantry, but they're still really good against these sorts of heavily armored tanky infantry, just because they themselves are pretty survivable with their monsters' melee defense. So the Graveguard aren't going to hit them very often, and they can hit the Graveguard pretty hard with 32 weapon strength, armor piercing, so even without the anti-large bonus going in, they'll do well. Unfortunately for me, I didn't notice these Direwolves, and you can see they're circling around, flanking around my War Dancers as our spears. My opponent had a lot of Direwolves, which meant that I wasn't quite able to keep track of them. Unfortunately for me, though, my opponent does dive in on my poor little Branch Wraith over here, who does get terror routed. Interestingly enough, despite the fact that, and this is actually one of those things that doesn't entirely make sense, Dryads have immunity to psychology. Durthu, well, of course, the Treemen and Treekin have immunity to psychology. The Treekin have immunity to psychology. Durthu and the Treemen, of course, have fear and terrors. But for some ungodly reason, the Branch Wraith does not have immunity to psychology. So he's actually going to get terror outed by the dragon, and that's going to be that. He's going to flee for dear life. But unfortunately for my opponent, who did commit over here, he is getting pounded into the dust by that mass volley fire coming in from the Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts. Unfortunately for me, though, I wasn't paying attention, and these Direwolves are going to be able to sneak around and get into my backline, disrupting this Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts that are really kind of a key tool here in taking down the Vampire Lord. Unfortunately for my opponent, though, despite the fact that he's able to wrap these Glade Guard up, there's still another unit of him over here, which for some reason decided to path towards the dragon. Not entirely sure why. As well as these Sisters of the Thorn, who are still pounding away at the Vampire Lord. Sword of Death does go down to try to clear up these Graveguard, and you can see over here in the pits, the War Dancers as our spears doing a great job, just slowly but surely crushing through these Graveguard, crunching their way through them. They've lost about 20 models, but in turn the Graveguard are falling apart. The Spellslinger of Shadows does jump in, providing her support. And you can see these War Dancers coming in for some pincer maneuvers, and they're going to collapse these Graveguard pretty badly. Graveguard, despite having pretty good good stats, definitely I think one of the better infantry in the game, are just not really cut out for being surrounded and beaten down like that. Up here in the sky, you can see the Vampire Lord having a terrible day of it, and over here the Sisters of the Thorn do engage on the Wolves, kind of crushing these puppies in melee. You can see the poor stag over there just going down, but really these guys are pretty decent in close quarters, and dire wolves can't really cut through that 50% physical resist very effectively. Plus, these guys have decent melee stats to boot. You can see they've gained a chevron. They're sitting at 34 melee defense, so really they're a tough nut to crack. Sisters of the Thorn definitely been doing work. You can see over here we did get a Shield of Thorns off, which does improve these guys' weapon strength up to the 40s. They are able to kind of start crushing this Terrorgeist. The Terrorgeist, of course, doesn't have the best melee stats to begin with, so it's getting torn apart. You can see over here my opponent does get a little greedy, thinking he can maybe pick off the Spellslinger of Shadows, kind of a last-ditch effort. But it doesn't work out. Gets hit by Curse of Honorary, gets hit by Enfeebling Foe. Immediately his stats drop completely, and he's actually going to get taken out pretty ignominiously over here, just beaten to snot in the pits and surrounded by angry War Dancers. And that's going to be game. So definitely I made some mistakes with my deployment, and definitely made some mistakes, I think, with the units I selected. Probably 2 Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts are adequate, and I brought 3. You do want some. I think you do want some range pressure. If you're, especially if you're not going with, say, Wild Riders or something like that. If your opponent decides to bring, say, a Mortis Engine, it's probably not going to win the game. Wood Elves, because the Mortis Engine is very expensive. If you do a build like this, you're probably going to overrun the Vampire Count's army pretty quickly and be done with it, essentially. But then the Mortis Engine, if it's, say, the what is it called? The one that freezes. The Claw of Nagash. If that's what your opponent has, they can just kite you for days. And if you just have War Dancers and Durthu and Branch Wraith, really you don't have too many options to run it down. So I think it's always good to bring at least a handful of Glade Guard Starfire Shafts, also to apply pressure to some of those regenning annoying armored units like Terrorgeist. But regardless, this game I definitely made a mistake with the way I deployed them, and I ended up losing 2 units. Especially the second one was really unnecessary. I could have easily sort of flecked those with some of my War Dancers. As for the rest of the comp, I definitely think it's decent. Durthu, of course, is a battering ram. He's a force of nature. And he's definitely providing those debuffs that let the War Dancers do their job. The War Dancers themselves, of course, very potent, trading rather well with Graveguard. I'm not entirely sure who wins in a straight-up fight, but War Dancers can chew through basically anything the Vampire Counts put on the field pretty effectively, except for their Cav, and they'll do okay against the Graveguard. War Dancers as our spears, of course, did a great job as well, shutting down the cavalry, shutting down the direwolves, of course, with the help of the Sisters of the Thorn, and ultimately kind of helping mop up and hold down these Graveguard for their friends over here. And of course, the Sisters of the Thorn, absolute monster of a unit. I'm definitely enjoying these guys more and more. Very potent unit. You can see 95 kills here. They're decent in melee. They're no pushovers. They might. I'm not entirely sure who. I'm not entirely sure if Illyrian. I think Sisters of the Thorn would beat Illyrian Reaver archers in a straight up fight in melee, which says something, because Illyrian Reaver archers are definitely otherwise the best skirmish cav in the game as far as melee stats go. The Sisters of the Thorn definitely no pushovers. I definitely think they're either number 1 or 2 in melee. They're a very potent unit. So definitely did some good work here. For my opponent's build, great usage of the direwolves to oversaturate my line. Good usage of the Graveguard to just kind of hold and trade pretty well with the War Dancers. The Graveguard, of course, just did well, except for the spots where Durthu, of course, just piled in because they're not very good against him, but otherwise they did pretty well against the War Dancers and traded rather effectively. The Vargeist did a surprisingly good job. They intercepted the War Dancers and really laid the smackdown on them. Unfortunately, I think that my opponent might have been better off if he dropped the Vargeist on top of my Glade Guard. If he'd been able to get rid of all 3 units of Glade Guard, that would have probably been a much more decisive blow in the long term than sniping a unit of War Dancers that wasn't all that critical. But nonetheless, those Vargeist definitely caught me by surprise a little bit there. Terrorgeist, I think, obviously my opponent did need some anti-large in this build, something to deal with Durthu, Tree Men, that sort of stuff. But I don't really think the Terrorgeist delivered. Definitely not 4 chevrons worth. It got kind of trashed and got dumpstered pretty hard. Honestly, against Wood Elves, I think Blood Knights might be a decent pick, or maybe a more decent pick than a Terrorgeist, just because Wood Elves have a lot of anti-large with armor piercing to begin with, but a Terrorgeist doesn't tend to be. Say if your opponent brings Wild Riders, it's not that good of a counter to them as say Blood Knights. Blood Knights can just crush infantry, and they're much more flexible, and they'll still do okay if you're able to slaughter the rest of the. And really, what you need to do, you can't really snipe Wood Elf Lords very effectively. You need to basically crush the rest of their army, then go after the Lords, and for that, I think a bunch of Blood Knight or a unit or two of Blood Knights is much better than one or two Terrorgeists. So nonetheless, great game to my opponent Galzag. Definitely tight game. Was a lot of fun. It was awesome to see some good play with the direwolves there. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.